is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the 5th season, chapters 9 and 10, brought to you by Ashlyn. In these chapters, Syenite finds out that a 10-ringer can unpoison himself, and that is some intense shit. Also, it seems that we, in quotes, are getting closer to figuring out what this little kid really is. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So this section, Ashlyn specifically asked me, Ashlyn Wolf, asked me to do chapters 9 and 10, even though that's a little shy of 50 pages, and to revisit the 2-page interlude. And what she asked, this is really interesting. In her email, she said, "I would love to hear what you think it means. What is missing? It is not addressed again in the book, and I haven't read book 2 yet. I'm giving myself the set for Christmas. So this isn't a spoiler or a hint, as I genuinely don't know. But I have a guess, and I want to see if you speculate the same thing." So since we've already read the interlude, I'm going to go back and revisit it from the start as I'm recording this. So this is something that I think I know what you're getting at, Ashlyn, and I'm interested. I wish that you were able to come to the Crowdcast. I don't know if you had been able to come to the original time and my moving it meant that you could no longer come, and if that's the case, I really apologize. But yeah, I wish that you were here so that we could commiserate on this. So I'm going to read you guys the interlude because it's not that long, and I want you all to get the full vibe of it. Before I start talking about it. Okay, interlude. A break in the pattern. A snarl in the weft. There are things you should be noticing here. Things that are missing and conspicuous by their absence. Notice, for example, that no one in the stillness speaks of islands. This is not because islands do not exist or are uninhabited. Quite the contrary. It is because islands tend to form near faults or atop hotspots, which means they are ephemeral things in the planetary scale, there with an eruption and gone with the next tsunami. But human beings, too, are ephemeral things in the planetary scale. The number of things that they do not notice are literally astronomical. People in the stillness do not speak of other continents either, though it is plausible to suspect that they might exist elsewhere. No one has traveled around the world to see that there aren't any. Seafaring is dangerous enough with resupply in sight and tsunami waves that are only 100 feet high rather than the legendary mountains of water said to ripple across the unfettered deep ocean. They simply take as given the bit of lore passed down from braver civilizations that says there's nothing else. Likewise, no one speaks of celestial objects, though the skies are as crowded and busy here as anywhere else in the universe. This is largely because so much of the people's attention is directed toward the ground, not the sky. They notice what's there, stars and sun and the occasional comet or falling star. They do not notice what's missing. But then, how can they? Who misses what they have never, ever even imagined? That would not be human nature. How fortunate, then, that there are more people in this world than just humankind. So, they notice what's there. They do not notice what's missing. My only guess here is that what caught Ashlyn's attention, as well as mine, is the obelisks floating in the air are not talked about in the story so far. They're mentioned as existing. And in a later chapter, an amethyst one that is coming a little bit closer than it had is mentioned again. But otherwise, there is really no discussion of them amongst anyone. And they're simply floating above the earth in what I had taken to be a steady height. But the mention that the amethyst one has gotten closer, and this is not unusual enough for Syenite to say something to Alabaster about it and be alarmed, makes me think that their heights alter frequently. And I don't know if there is something else in the sky that these obelisks are replacing. Are there not clouds? Because I don't think that's true, because we hear about the seasons being caused by ash in the air, right? So one would think, does the ash solidify into these obelisks? Are these created by explosions and volcanic eruptions? I don't know. So that's the only thing that I can think. And I wonder if these obelisks aren't like the birthplace of some of these stone people. But when we get the description of the stone boy being born, in quotes, at the beginning of this book, I don't feel like there's a mention of an obelisk. Is there? You know what? I'm going to go check that. Let me see what chapter that is. You're on your way. You're not alone. Nope. You at the end. Prologue, you are here. I think that's it, right? It starts with the you at the end. Here is a land, it is ordinary as lands go. Boop, boop, boop. So we get the black star and the description of Eumenes. You can imagine how he looks for now. You can also imagine what he's thinking. Okay, no, this is the guy who is talking to the stone woman. Stone eaters. I forget that that's what they're called. Stone eaters. It ripples, reverberates, and cataclysm. Now there is a line roughly east-west and too straight, almost neat in its manifest unnaturalness, spanning the girth of the land's equator. The line's origin point is the city of Eumenes. So this is the beginning of the real big break. The obelisks had other names once back when they were first built and deployed and used. But no one remembers those names or the great device's purpose. Memories are fragile as slate in the stillness. In fact, these days no one really pays much attention to these things at all, though they are huge and beautiful and a little terrifying. Massive crystalline shards that hover amid the clouds, so there are clouds rotating slowly and drifting along incomprehensible flight paths, blurring now again as if they are not quite real, though this may only be a trick of the light. It isn't. It's obvious that the obelisks are nothing natural. It's equally obvious that they are irrelevant, awesome but purposeless, just another grave marker of just another civilization successfully destroyed by Father Earth's tireless efforts. There are many other such cairns around the world. The people who built those old things were weak and died as the weak inevitably must. More damning is that they failed. The ones who built the obelisks just failed harder than most. But the obelisks exist, and they play a role in the world's end, and thus are worthy of note. Guys, I don't know what to make of it. That's when we get into the description of Essun. Here it is. At the northernmost end of the valley is devastation. The scouts from Terima who came this way to survey the damage did not climb over the rubble. They just looked at it through long eyes from the remaining road. More terrifying are the signs coming out of the north. The scouts eventually leave. If they had not been so preoccupied, they might have noticed an object sitting near the foot of the newly sheared cliff, unobtrusively nestled between a listing gnarl fir and cracked boulders. The object would have been notable for its size and shape, a kidney-shaped oblong of mottled chalcedony, dark green-gray, markedly different from the paler sandstone tumbled around it. If they had gone to stand near it, they would have noticed that it was chest-high and nearly the length of a human body. If they had touched it, they might have been fascinated by the density of the object's surface. It's a heavy-looking thing, with an iron-like scent reminiscent of rust and blood. It would have surprised them by being warm to the touch. Instead, no one is around when the object groans faintly and then splits, fissioning neatly along its axis as if sawed. There is a loud scream hiss of escaping heat and pressured gas as this happens, which sends any nearby surviving forest creatures skittering for cover. In a near instantaneous flicker, light spills from the edges of the fissure, something like flame and something like liquid, leaving scorched glass on the ground around the object's base. Then the object grows still for a long while, cooling. Several days pass. After a time, something pushes the object apart from within and crawls a few feet before collapsing. Another day passes. Now that it has cooled and split, a crust of irregular crystals, some clouded white and some red as venous blood, line the object's inner surface. Thin, pale liquid puddles near the bottom of each halve's cavity, though most of the fluid the geode contained has soaked away into the ground underneath. So, it could have been an obelisk, but it's not specific enough in its description. It just keeps calling it the object. But it's a different type of stone from the stone around it. And that could be that it's like a pocket that is born from the sandstone. Or it could be a totally different stone that sheared the cliff because it was an obelisk that fell to ground and broke it. So, I'm really curious about this. I don't know. I'm really not sure what this is supposed to, like, I'm wondering if the whole thing is supposed to be the obelisks have a role in the end of the world and that they were a creation from an earlier, like, people that was eliminated. And were they trying to create a new race that could survive the constant shifting? Were the obelisks do they have nothing to do with the stone people? And were they trying to create a new, like, place for people to live that wasn't touching the earth so that they could survive? Because I feel like that's probably the ideal situation if you're going to try and, like, sustain life in a stable way, is you still are close enough to the ground to have access to what it has to offer, but you don't have to live there. Although that wouldn't really solve the problem, would it? Because having access to the earth, you would still depend on the earth for farming and the water supply, which is what gets tainted by these explosions and volcanic eruptions. So it's not so much the loss of human life from the act of the earthquakes themselves, it's the aftermath that's the real problem and causes the season. So living off of the surface wouldn't really help anything. I don't know, Ashlyn. Am I completely off base? Is this not at all what you meant when you asked me what if I noticed that something was missing? I don't know. Yeah, God, I don't know. All right, so let's go to chapters 9 and 10. 9 is Syenite among the enemy. This is, in some ways, hilarious, although it is really frustrating also. So she and Alabaster are traveling, and there are a lot of, like, obstacles is the wrong word because that suggests something that you can put behind you. There is a lot of resistance to their traveling. A lot of people that glare at them because of their black uniforms. A lot of people who, like, they have somebody follow them at one point, and it seems like this person's hoping to, like, pick a fight with them. There's just a lot of tension everywhere they go. And when they finally find inns to stay at, they get, like, really badly price gouged. But apparently the people who work for the Fulcrum know that Origins often have to deal with this kind of garbage, so they have given Syenite and Alabaster a lot more money than they would really strictly need if people were being fair with them. So they're able to pay it. That's not the problem. It's just like the insult of it, you know? And they trade off horses as well, because Alabaster's horse, ever since they made that incredibly the sped up and difficult race to get to the node station, his horse has been injured and limping. So they trade out and get a mare. And the mare doesn't seem to like Alabaster too much, which Syenite thinks is pretty funny. So they get to Alia, which is the name of the, or Alia. I think I want to say Alia because there's two L's, and for some reason that makes me feel like the accent's a little bit, like, later. Alia's main gates are made out of metal, and it's the kind of thing where they look really impressive and beautiful, but practically they don't make any sense. And this is something that I wouldn't never have picked up on, but there's a lot of explaining of the various reasons why having metal gates is a stupid move. In a season, the first acid rain will eat those bolts apart, and one good sixer will warp the precision plates out of alignment, making the great huge things impossible to close. Everything about the gates screams that this is a comm with lots of new money and not enough lorists talking to its leadership cast. So I just, like, this is, again, the sort of thing that, to me, you know, metal is like the strongest thing. But when it's put in those sorts of terms, it's really startling that, like, the earth and earthquakes are the thing that they're all afraid of, but the material best suited to withstanding the kind of damage that earthquakes do is stone, which you would think would be much, because stone is so brittle and breaks, one would think would be not what you want. But this is not a world where they're worried about people. Like, metal might be safer and keep people more alive, but this isn't a world where they're worried about the safety of the people so much as the practicality of fixing things once they inevitably are broken. They take it as a given that their property and buildings are going to be damaged, and they just try and plan ahead enough that won't completely ruin and require them to start from square one again. So it's just a really different way of looking at things, and I appreciate a lot that Jemison is able to put her head in that sort of mindset and really think through the difference in approach that people who deal with this constant threat would have from people who are guarding against it as like a hypothetical. So then they get to the gate, and nobody at the gate is even paying attention, really. They're all in uniform, but they're like reading and playing cards and just kind of not paying attention enough, which Syenite is not super impressed by. And then she gets even more irritated because once somebody finally notices them and lets them in, he stares at Alabaster's fingers because they each have a ring, and doesn't even like spare a glance for Syenite, which she finds probably pretty insulting. So Alia is the only large city in the entire Quartant. Syen can't remember what the other three comms of the Quartant are called, or what the nation was called before it became a nominal part of Sanze. Some of the old nations reclaimed their names after Sanze loosened control, but the Quartant system worked better, so it didn't really matter. She knows it's all farming and fishing country, as backwater as any other coastal region. Despite all this, the governor's mansion is impressively beautiful, with artful oh boy, you guys. Eumenesceni architectural details all over it. Ooh, that is a word. There are so many E's. Like cornices, windows made of glass, and yes, a single decorative balcony overlooking a vast forecourt. Completely unnecessary ornamentation, in other words, which probably has to be repaired every minor shake. And did they really have to paint the whole building bright yellow? It looks like some kind of giant rectangular fruit. So I really like this, the descriptions of little things, which, like, it's meant to look nice and be impressive, but it just sort of speaks to, like, how foolish it all is. And I love, like, obviously I care about aesthetics a great deal, as anybody who's watching this crowdcast can tell by looking behind me in my own office. But I do try to be practical with it, and this sort of thing I find really frustrating. It's just a waste, you know? That's really the main thing to me, is like the waste of having to constantly replace and fix things. Why? So they are greeted by somebody who like washes their hands for them, which is a local tradition because of disease that spreads really easily. So they do that like before anybody is even allowed in. And they get gestured in, and before they're even like settled, they don't even get to sit down when they're met by somebody. I was going to say greeted by somebody, but that is not the word that I want. They are met by somebody who just says, "It took you both long enough to get here. We expected you a week ago. Do you want to proceed to the harbor right away, or can you do it from here?" Syenite opens her mouth to reply that she'd rather go to the harbor since she's never shaken a coral ridge before, and being closer will help her understand it better. Before she can speak, however, Alabaster says, "I'm sorry. Who are you?" Here begins the best thing. And don't get me wrong. Alabaster is really pushing his luck. We find out later, and I'm not convinced that the poisoning is directly as a result of his behavior here, so much as like they just don't like Origins and might have poisoned him anyway. But I get the feeling that if they were going to poison them anyway, they would have done both of them in. I think that he was targeted because of this. But it's so satisfying in the moment that it's hard for me to feel any regret that he decided to do this. So she says what her name is, and he's like, "Yeah, but that's not it. We don't want your name. We want to know who you are in the scheme of things because we were told that we were going to be meeting the governor." And she's like, "Well, I'm the deputy governor." And Syenite is very aware that Alabaster is raging angry. Like, there is just so much fury in him that he is keeping very much hidden, but she can tell it's there because she knows him. And he is so okay. "We must be polite, Cyan. We're only Origins, after all, and this is a member of the Stillness's most esteemed use cast. We are merely here to wield powers greater than she can comprehend in order to save her region's economy, while she is a pedantic minor bureaucrat. But I'm sure she's a very important pedantic minor bureaucrat." Yo, this motherfucker is pushing his luck. It is really great, though. I love it so much. And she tries to like take it in stride that he's insulting her and be like, "Well, it's a minor matter, so a minor bureaucrat can deal with it." And Alabaster says, "Yeah, no, this is not a minor matter. Y'all have been dealing with this coral overgrowth for 10 years at least, based on what I saw on our way in. You have, your entire like market is about to collapse, which is why you were willing to pay an absurd amount of money to get us to fix it. And I know it was an absurd amount of money because I was sent and I'm their top man. So if you were willing to spend that kind of money, you're very desperate, which means that your entire economy is basically in our hands, and you don't have to try and act like this isn't a major deal to all of you because we know we're not fucking idiots." And I really love the description too. He looks like he's considering getting angry, though Cyan knows he's already there. "So the least you could do first is offer us some hospitality and then introduce us to the man who made us travel several hundred miles to solve your little problem. That's courtesy, yes? That's how officials of note are generally treated. Wouldn't you agree?" In spite of herself, Cyan wants to cheer. And she says that she will introduce him to, she will at least tell the governor that they want to meet him, and then says sort of threateningly that she will let the governor know how disappointed they are with the protocol, and she says, with the usual protocol regarding guests. And Alabaster says, if this is how you usually treat guests, then I think you should convey our disappointment. Really, right to business like this? Not even a cup of safe to refresh us after our long journey? I was told that you had stopped in the outlying districts for the night. Yes, and that took the edge off. The accommodations were also less than optimal. When was the last time you traveled 1,500 miles, Deputy Governor? I assure you, you'll need more than a day's rest to recover. So finally, he says, like, we're going to stay in this really nice inn, and we're going to send you the bill. And Syen is sort of like, because she sees the reaction of the deputy, who is kind of freaking out. And Syen is like, well, the inn is a little bit expensive, but it's not exactly a completely unreasonable request. And then she realizes that the deputy has no authorization to pay for the accommodations. So she has to agree in the face of the way he's reacting to her. But if the people in charge think that she should have handled it another way, chances are she's going to be penalized for it, and they're going to take it out of her pay, which that sucks. However, I don't really feel sorry for her. I love, too, Syen's, like, notices when the woman replies and says, of course, that she even manages to smile, and Syen is almost, like, admiring that she has the presence of mind. I'm trying to find, there's another moment where Syen is thinking about how, where is the part? Oh, here it is. The woman is utterly still. Syenite cannot read her expression, but her body is stiff and she's drawn back ever so slightly. In fear? Maybe. More likely in reaction to Alabaster's verbal darts. Oh, no, that's not the spot. But there's some point where she says that... Oh, here it is. Her gaze swings back to him, which Syen completely understands. Nobody is more irritating than her mentor. She feels a sudden perverse pride. I love that so much. That's really the thing. A perverse pride. It's sort of like... there's a part in Dresden Files where he gets... somebody that had been like an enemy. I don't even remember what this is, but he talks about it. He calls it Vader syndrome, where somebody who has been sort of tormenting you and making like life difficult for you is on your side unexpectedly, and how satisfying it is to watch somebody who had been on your side or who had been against you wreaking that same havoc on your own enemy. I think he was saying it in regard to the White Council. But yeah, I really like, it's a beautiful thing when somebody irritates the fuck out of you, but then they redirect it towards somebody that you don't like. So they leave, and Syenite says, was that really necessary? Because I really would rather just have gotten this done and gotten out of here. And he says, I thought you would have liked being treated like a human being for a change. To which she's like, I mean, sure, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make any difference because it won't change how they feel about us. And he says, no, it won't. But I don't give a shit how they feel about us. I care what they do. And Syenite's sort of like, all right, like, I do see your point. But also, technically, this is my assignment. And if we wind up getting in trouble over the way that you treated her, it's going to come down on me rather than you. Which I'm curious if that's actually true in practice. I'm sure in theory that's how it's supposed to go. But because of the fact that she is... Because he's a 10 ringer versus her, 4, I think? I don't know that they would necessarily respond that way in practice. But yeah, so they go to the inn, which is really, really nice. And they order food, but they try and they don't over order because they don't want to be able to be accused of taking advantage and being too, what's the word I want? Like exorbitant. And the food is really good, and Syenite eats her fill, and she gives a bunch of her food to Alabaster as well, because she sees how incredibly thin he's gotten all of a sudden when he gets out of the bath. And, you know, they've been dressed and traveling, so she hasn't gotten a chance to really take a look at him. And when she shoves a bunch of her food at him, he has to stop and, like, think about it, and then is like, oh, shit, I'm losing a bunch of weight, huh? And then he explains to her, and this is really interesting. He says, when I'm in the earth, I don't sense my own body. He says, apparently this is just something that happens past the 7th or 8th ring. The fulcrum has me on a strict dietary regimen, but I haven't been following it much. So because of his connection with the earth, because he's a 10 ringer, he doesn't feel the hunger pangs or the exhaustion or any of it the way that he did when he was in his own body in a more consistent way. So he just loses weight without really realizing it's happening. And when she pushes him to eat, he does it. He's not arguing with her and putting up a fuss and being like, no, I'm fine. He knows that this will happen. But it just doesn't occur to him until somebody else points it out, which I thought was pretty interesting. So then, in the middle of the night, this is so crazy. Syenite dreams that she is falling upward through a shaft of wavering light that ripples and refracts around her like dirty water. At the top of the shaft, something shimmers there and away and back again, like it's not quite real, not quite there. She starts awake, unsure of why she is suddenly feeling like something is wrong. So she sits up and she turns and looks at Alabaster, and he is sitting there with his eyes open and staring and his mouth open, and he's like gurgling, but can't move clearly. And it takes a second before she realizes that he's choking on his own drool, and she has to turn him over so that it pours out and he's able to actually breathe again. But he's still not able to move at all. And he's like, it seems like he's sending her a sort of mental message that something's really wrong, but she can't fucking figure out what it is. And meanwhile, there's like a tremor going through the town. And it's at least going through the building, because she says they're probably chalking it up to a strong wind gust against the building's side for now. And when she tells him to fucking chill out, he kind of does rein it in a little bit, and she's able to like breathe because there's that connection between the two of them that he's managed to establish. So she's just losing her shit and feeling him losing his as well. So he's trying to signal to her when she tells him that she's going to go get a doctor. He like jerks so that the building shakes again really quickly, and that she interprets as a no, don't you dare. And she can feel him like in her consciousness somehow. And she gets the sense that he's like looking around, but not finding what he needs. And she can't understand what it is that he's looking for or what he's trying to do. So all of a sudden, she feels something like in her head kind of contract. And then his power folds around her, and she's back in what feels like the dream. She's falling up, and this somehow makes sense. All around her, the place she's falling through is color and faceted flickering like water, except it's purple pale instead of blue or clear, low-quality amethyst with a dollop of smoky quartz. She flails within it, sure for an instant that she's drowning, but this is something that she perceives with sesapine and not skin or lungs. She can't be flailing because it's not water, and she's not really here, and she can't drown because somehow Alabaster has her. Where she flails, he is purposeful. He drags her up, falling faster, searching for something, and she can almost hear the howl of it feel the drag of forces like pressure and temperature gradually chilling and prickling her skin. And she is elsewhere, floating amid immense gelid things. And there is something on them, among them, a contaminant. So, first of all, I had never heard the word gelid before, which means very cold, Beachy Dubs. And when she snaps back into herself, Alabaster is vomiting. Now I'm going to summarize here what the fuck just happened. He was poisoned with botulism. And that botulism he could detect in his system and was able to focus and concentrate on, using some of her power to assist him and pull the contaminant up out of his bloodstream and stomach and God knows what else and vomit it up, which is bananas. Like, I can't even, what? And when she's thinking about how impossible this, should be, she thinks any infant can move a mountain. That's instinct. Only a trained fulcrum origin can deliberately, specifically move a boulder. And only a 10-ringer, apparently, can move the infinitesimal substances floating and darting in the interstices of his blood and nerves. It should be impossible. She shouldn't believe that he's done this, but she helped him do it, so she can't do anything but believe the impossible. So yeah, he says that he has such total control and focus that he's able to, and that he is able to link with her power and is a sort of a yoke. Which she's like, well, no, but that's just not possible. And he's like, well, guess it didn't happen then. And she's so pissed about it. And she's in the middle of yelling at him when he thanks her for helping save his life. And she's sort of all the wind is taken out of her sails because she was really prepared to just let him have it. And then he thanks her like a total dick. So she is deflated a little bit. And she's thinking about and I'm not entirely sure how she knows that this is exactly what they used to poison him. If maybe her being in his system and seeing it the way that she did gave her more clues that point towards what exactly it was. But she's remembering jars of fruits and veggies that got, preserved, and that there are some that smell so terrible when you open them that you have to get the place aired out for a whole day before the smell is gone. But there are ones that are actually genuinely really dangerous that don't look bad or smell bad. The only giveaway that what's inside will kill you is a buckling of the metal lid, which those of you who are familiar with botulism and canned goods know what that can look like. It looks almost like a slightly overinflated balloon. Botulism in a can produces gases, so it forces outward the metal. So she's, remembering back to working in a kitchen, and one of the cooks holding up this little jar and saying that everybody in the fulcrum could die from this one jar because it just takes a tiny, tiny drop. Your muscles lock up and stop working. You can't even breathe. So I guess that's how she knows, because of his symptoms. Which, yeah, I remember reading about how much botulism it takes to kill you. And it's something like 1/100th of a gram, something insanely tiny. But because it seizes your muscles up, that's what Botox is. That is used to keep your muscles from contracting and giving you wrinkles. So we have figured out a way to turn that to our advantage in a weird way. I don't think it's the exact same strain, but it's based on that. So she's thinking back then to whether or not she made it clear when she placed the order for food which one of them was going to be eating what. And she was pretty sure that she did tell very clearly what was going to be for her and what was for him. So it's pretty clear that they purposely went through to try and poison him and wanted her to be okay. And she doesn't really know why that would be. Because obviously, if they had toxic juice, they could just do that to both of them easily enough. It's not like, and she would be sick by now if it had been both of them that got poisoned. So this is the end of the chapter here. When she, in the morning when she leans out the window to inhale the dew-laden air in a futile attempt to shake herself to alertness, she happens to glance up. There, winking in the dawn light, is a great hovering shard of amethyst. Just an obelisk, one she vaguely remembers seeing the day before as they were riding into Alia. They're always beautiful, but so are the lingering stars, and she hardly pays attention to either in the normal course of affairs. She notices this one now, however, because today it's a lot closer than it was yesterday. So I'm really, really interested. Is this coming closer because, like, does something about a 10 ringer, like, attract obelisks? I don't know. I'm just really curious about that. So, okay. Chapter 10, You Walk Beside the Beast. So this is the Essun chapter where it is set in the second person. And I'm going to, again, talk about it as if it's Essun in the third person. So Essun is thinking about maybe changing identities, which she has apparently done before, and found it somewhat easy to do. Taking on a new personality was even easy to do. But Essun is too worried about losing who she is, because if she does that, going back isn't something that's easy to do. And if she finds Essun, her daughter, then she will no longer be Essun's mother. So unless she finds, like, that Essun is dead, she is not willing to give up her present identity because she needs to be the mother that Essun has always known. So Essun will have to make do with the broken bits of herself that Jija has left behind. You'll jigsaw them together however you can, caulk in the odd bits with willpower wherever they don't quite fit, ignore the occasional sounds of grinding and cracking. As long as nothing important breaks, right? You'll get by. You have no choice. Not as long as some of your children could be alive. Or one of your children. So, Essun is sleeping with Hoa and gets woken up by the sound of people screaming. And immediately gets up and books it away from there. She and Hoa had set up camp near a roadhouse, which basically a roadhouse is just a building with a water pump inside. It's not really like... It's a way station. It's, you know what it reminds me of? It's like a rest stop on the highway. You know, there's like bathrooms and maybe there's like a couple of what do you call it? Soda machines and like little snack machines. But there's really nothing there. It's just meant to take the edge off. You can use the bathroom. You can splash some water on your face. You can walk around a little bit. You can get a snack. And then you head on out, and there's not enough to really, like, keep you there. So everybody is sort of treating the roadhouse by a mutual understanding as if it's neutral territory and nobody actually camps out in the roadhouse because everybody needs access to it for the water. So there's a lot of little camps set up nearby, but nobody interacts with each other because everybody's way too nervous. By unspoken agreement, they are all terrified enough to stab first and ask questions later. That sounds right. Okay, so she's thinking about how everybody is unprepared for this season change. That, supposedly they spend their whole lives preparing for this sort of thing. But that once it actually happens, it's so sudden that even though they think they're ready, it's not actually easy to adjust at all. And she has a fire lit for her and Hoa, even though that might not be a smart idea. But at this point, she's just sort of like so exhausted and so cold and just tired of all of this garbage that she's like, you know what? Fuck it. So she tells Hoa to wake her up after the first like brick of peat that she's lit for heat, that he should wake her right after that one has burned out. And she goes to sleep, but he doesn't wake her ever. When she's finally awakened by the sound of screaming, the fire has burned way down, and he should have woken you up hours ago, but he has not done that. You notice how I always transition to the you, despite my determination to talk about it in the third person. I can't keep it up. So forgive my pauses, guys. I'm just so congested. I'm trying to my cold is almost totally gone, but nevertheless, speaking for several hours in a row, this is my third commission of the day, all by myself. It just really my throat and my nose are just like, what are you doing? Shut up and go get the neti pot. So she wakes up because of the screaming, grabs Hoa by the hand. And Hoa kind of shies away from you when you try and grab his hand, and finally just lets you take him. And I assumed here that the reason Hoa was so worried was because the texture of his body when she grabbed his hand would give away the fact that he's not a normal child. But that doesn't seem to happen. When she touches him by the hand, I think she's so panicked that she doesn't register that he doesn't feel like a hand, because he has to feel that when she touches him later and tries to hold him back, he doesn't move the way that he would if you grabbed a flesh and blood child's arm. So I'm puzzled at the fact that she's able to grab his hand here and not pick up on the fact that something's different. But she grabs his hand. They run off at a dead sprint as long as she can hold out until she finally has to stop and walk. And then Hoa asks her, well, what the hell happened, basically. And she looks down at him and realizes that he isn't breathing hard at all. He's fine, which she attributes to him being a child and having endless energy. But I don't think that's exactly what it is. So yeah, when she stops and talks to him about what's going on and realizes that she hasn't filled the canteens with water, he suggests maybe you should go back to the creek where we were the other night. And she considers it, but it's a full day's walk in the direction away from where they need to be going. And she just can't bear to do it. She asks him what is happening to her daughter. And he won't really answer her. He doesn't, and I'm not sure if he can't or what, but the way he reacts, what is he doing to her, you ask softly? He must know what she is by now. The boy only watches. If he worries about you, he doesn't let it show on his face. So, yeah, I'm not sure that she's directly asking him, even though he can sense her daughter, apparently. So he might have been able to answer. But in any case, she's giving away that she is an origin and that her daughter probably is too, and just sort of lets that sort of hang there. Also, she's asking him, why didn't you wake me up? And he's like, I didn't need to sleep. I couldn't sleep. So you clearly needed it, and I just let you. And she thinks this means that he's going to just get tired later and fall asleep in the middle of the day when they're supposed to be walking. But I think maybe stone eaters don't need to sleep at all, which would be very convenient. I would love to not need to sleep. I don't think it's a probably good idea. I feel about that concept the way that I do about women who take their birth control pills straight through and skip the week that you're supposed to like drop it so that you get your period. There are a lot of women who like continue taking their pills on top of each other so that they don't have to get a period at all. And while I know that it's been deemed safe by a lot of OBGYNs and gynecologists and stuff to do that, it just makes me really uncomfortable to mess with your body's cycles in that way. So the idea of like, if I didn't need to sleep, I'm so paranoid that it would have some weird long lasting repercussions to not sleep that I can't even like let myself fantasize about it without immediately being like, ooh, but I bet that would fuck you up long term somehow. You just need rest, you know, you really do need it, just at least for your brain. But yeah, I don't know. So she finally decides that she's going to go back to the roadhouse, and the boy comes with her, even though she's like, you know, kind of acting really fierce at this point and worrying that she's going to scare him off. He doesn't seem at all intimidated. So they head over there, and she goes into the roadhouse, and there's a woman there who's humming and very chill and filling up a bunch of different canteens, some really, really big ones. And she is super, super dirty. This woman's hair is matted, not in clean, well-groomed locks like yours, but from sheer neglect. It hangs in moldy, uneven clumps from her head. Her skin isn't just covered in dirt. The dirt is ground in, a permanent fixture. There's iron ore in some of it, and it's rusted from the moisture in her skin, tinting the pattern of her pores red. Some of her clothes are fresh. Given how much you saw abandoned around the roadhouse, easy to guess where she got those. And the pack at her feet is one of 3, each one fat with supplies and dangling an already filled canteen. But her body odor is so high and ripe that you're hoping she's taking all that water to use for a bath. I'm curious if there isn't something about self-defense with like the body odor or not washing, but I have no idea how things work in this world enough to like make that sort of guess. So it turns out that this woman, who we don't get a name from her, do we? She is actually sort of agreeable. The first thing that she says is like, are you going to kill me? And you know, Essun is just like, no, I'm not going to kill you. I just want to get some water. And she's like, all right, yeah, go ahead. I have like such big ones to fill. Yours won't take very long, so I'll wait for you to get finished. Leave us be and we'll do the same. Solid by me. You unsling your canteen and edge over to the pump. It's awkward. The thing is meant to be worked by one person while another holds a container. The woman puts a hand on the pump, silently offering. You nod, and she pumps for you. You drink your fill first, and then there's a tense silence while the canteen fills. Nerves make you break it. So they're talking about like all like the way that things have gone down and whether or not like basically theorizing on what the hell happened to make everybody get up and run the way that they did. And she begins talking about the earthquake. And the way that she talks about this is really curious to me. She says that it was a 9er, and then says, never seen a shake like that. Weird wave pattern to it. Probably breached a lot of aquifers. They'll repair themselves over time, of course, but in the short term, no telling what kind of contaminants might be around here. I mean, this is perfect land for a city, right? Flat, ready access to water, nowhere near a fault. Means there's probably was a city here at one point. You know what kind of nasty things cities leave behind when they die? And so she points to this thing that there is like a dangling strip of tree bark in the water. And she says, this is made from the same plant as safe, but I treated it with a little something extra to catch those substances safe doesn't catch. There's nothing, you blurt, and then you fall silent, uneasy when she focuses sharply on you. Now you have to finish. I mean, there's nothing safe misses that would hurt people. Now the woman looks annoyed. That's not true. Where the rust did you learn that? Safe doesn't work as well as if it's in a cold solution. Everybody knows that. It needs to be room temperature or lukewarm. It also doesn't catch things that kill you in a few months instead of a few minutes. Fat lot of good it'll do you to survive today, only to come down with skin peel next year. You're a geomist, you blurt. It seems impossible. You've met geomists. They're everything people think origines are when they're feeling charitable. Arcane, unfathomable, possessed of knowledge no mortal should have, disturbing. No one but a geomist would know so many useless facts so thoroughly. I am not. The woman draws herself up, almost swelling in her fury. I know better than to pay attention to those fools at the university. I'm not stupid. So I don't know what to make of this at all. I really don't know, like, what she is, how she knows this stuff. Is she an origin? It doesn't seem like she is, or else I feel like Essun would know this stuff too. And then when they get back to talking about what happened to all of the camps and why everybody bailed, she hints that there was an animal attack, and asks Essun, like, didn't you see the body? And it turns out that she is correct, and the body is the only thing that sort of saves their asses because it's distracting the animals that are in the middle of eating so that the rest of them can get away. Not entirely, though. So here comes the thing that's crazy. It's a kirkhusa, one of the long-bodied furry creatures midladders keep as pets instead of dogs, since dogs are too expensive for anyone except the most ostentatious equatorials. Kirkhusa look more like big land-bound otters than canines. They're trainable, cheap as anything because they eat only the leaves of low bushes and the insects that grow on them. And they're even cuter than puppies when they're small. But this Kirkhusa is not cute. It's a big, good 100 pounds of healthy, sleek-furred flesh. Someone's loved it dearly, at least until lately. That's a fine leather collar still round its neck. It's growling, and as it slinks out of the grass and up onto the road, you see red blooms in the fur around its mouth and on its clawed prehensile paws. That's the problem with Kirkhusa, you see. The reason everyone can afford them. They eat leaves until they taste enough ash, which triggers some instinct within them that's normally dormant. Then they change. Everything changes during a season. So weird. Taste enough ash. That's what does it? Like, just so strange, you know? So this one that sees you is a lot more reticent to feast on a person. And Essun is theorizing, maybe it remembers its human masters fondly. Maybe it hesitated when the others attacked and failed to earn more than a taste of the meat that will be its new staple diet until the season ends. Now it will go hungry if it doesn't rethink its civilized ways. It pads back and forth on the asphalt, chittering to itself as if in indecision, but it doesn't leave. It's got you and Hoa and the calmless woman boxed in while it wrestles with its conscience. Poor, poor thing. So Essun says to Hoa not to move, but he does not pay attention to her and goes up to it and holds its hand out. And Essun is watching this like, what in the fuck is he doing? And notices when she reaches out and tries to yank him back, he doesn't move at all. And she can't figure this out. So he holds its arm out and the Kirkhusa attacks him. And Essun begins to gather power, thinking that maybe she can freeze just the Kirkhusa and not the boy in an attempt to save his life, because of course she assumes this boy is about to die, and she's racked with guilt at the idea that she took him in only to, like, let him be killed by this fucking thing. But then she pays attention and sees that the Kirkhusa is locked in place on Hoa's arm, and its fur is moving. And then she realizes that the whole thing is turning into glass, that all of it is turning rock hard, including its fur, and you just don't even know what to make of it. So Essun comes forward and is looking at this fucking thing. And he's like, did you do this? And Hoa says, I hadn't meant for you to see this yet. And she says, well, what did you do? And he won't tell her. But she can see that he's bleeding. So she's like, all right, let me find something to help get your arm out of there. Because now this thing is like locked around his arm, but it's solid. And all he has to do is twist his arm, and the head of the Kurkusa shatters. And his arm is free again. And he's bleeding, but his arm is free. So this is really interesting that they can bleed. I don't know what that is, like what the blood is. Is it rust? Is it like, what is that made of? Because when she touches him, it doesn't seem like he, like, you know, when she grabbed his hand earlier, she doesn't say anything about it feeling like a different texture or that it's cold. So I guess he's warm. But yeah, it's just the whole way that this goes. And Essun is trying to be like, can I help you, like, clean that wound and fix it up? And he's like, no, I'm going to be fine. But you notice that Essun notices that he looks really miserable. And she at first thinks that maybe it's the wound itself. And then you realize that the poor kid is worried about what you are going to think of him. That it's a really familiar expression on his face, actually. So you offer your hand. Hoa looks surprised. He stares at it, then at you, and there is something in his gaze that is entirely human and grateful for your acceptance in that moment. It makes you feel a little more human too, amazingly. He takes your hand. His grip seems no weaker despite his wounds, so you pull him along as you turn south and start walking again. The calmless woman wordlessly follows. Or maybe she's walking in the same direction, or maybe she just thinks there's strength in numbers. None of you say anything because there's nothing to say. Behind you, in the meadow, the Kurkusa keep eating. And the verse that ends this chapter is, beware ground on loose rock. Beware hail strangers. Beware sudden silence. Tablet 1, on survival, verse 3. So that is crazy pants. I did not know that stone people could turn other things to stone, but that's wild. I want to see more of that, please. And yeah, I think I'm going to wrap this one up. Thank you very much again to Ashlyn Wolf for commissioning this. My apologies again for having to reschedule, but hopefully you enjoyed the coverage. And thank you all very much for listening. If you're interested in commissioning something, you can go to unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. And hopefully I will see you all again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.